Hey guys, this is Will at Third and Long. Today we are going to be breaking down the Week 6 games, reacting to everything that happened this weekend in the college football world. Who won, who lost for those AP Top 25 teams. It was a pretty crazy weekend. We had some pretty big teams go down, and we had some pretty big teams win. So let's go ahead and get started. Hit that like button and subscribe. Our very first game we had this weekend was number 12 Oklahoma hosting number 3 Texas. This was a crazy game. Oklahoma did get the win at the very end, 34-30. So a heartbreaker for the Longhorns fans because everybody thought that they were back, but that got ripped out. Props to Brent Venables. How far they've come. Last year they got steamrolled 49-0. This year they ended up winning versus a top 4 Texas. Now, Texas's season is not over because obviously with the Big 12 this year, whoever the top 2 ranked teams are get to play in the Big 12 championship. And the Big 12 is a complete disaster this year. So more than likely, it will be Oklahoma versus Texas round 2 in the Big 12 championship. So Texas's playoff hopes are still alive if they win out and beat Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship. Now, Oklahoma, the road is clear for them right now. The whole season is still in front of them. They just have to make sure not to slip up. But what a good game. What really cost Texas here? 3 turnovers, 2 picks, not a very efficient game by the Longhorns this week. They did give the game to Oklahoma, but Oklahoma took it. So what about Dillon Gabriel? 23 of 38, 285 yards, 1 touchdown, running 14 carries, 113 yards, and 1 touchdown. So he basically put this team on his back and won the game. Props to him. If he was not in the Heisman conversation before, he's definitely in it now. People that did not know his name, they better know it now because he was hot. Oklahoma was hot. Great win for them. And props to Brent Venables for completely turning this team around from last year. Total yardage, Sooners had 486. Texas had 527. But Texas lost that turnover battle. I don't think Texas will fall too far here, but I think Oklahoma is definitely going to jump up into that top 7 conversation right now. Texas will probably fall to the bottom half of the top 10, maybe like 8 or 9. Next game we had was Georgia Tech coming into town versus number 17 Miami. What a complete disaster this game was. So Georgia Tech was just coming off of getting steamrolled by Bowling Green. Yeah, Bowling Green beat the crap out of Georgia Tech, and then Miami hosts them and just completely lays an egg. This was probably the worst end to a game that I've ever seen. Mario Cristobal should be completely ashamed of himself. Now, they played a complete sloppy game, but they won the game. They had the ball at the end, 26 seconds left, and instead of kneeling, he runs the ball and they fumble and give up a touchdown to end the game. It's just despicable, and that's probably the worst way to end a game. But anyways, congratulations to Georgia Tech for getting the win, 23-20. Miami was like a 22-point favorite. So someone made a lot of money off of betting for the Yellow Jackets, but congratulations to them. So Miami goes down. No doubt they're going to get thrown right out of the top 25, and it's a complete shame. This is the 12th most talented roster in the country, and they lost to Georgia Tech. They were not up for this game coming off the bye week. That's a coaching problem. They must have been looking to the Tar Heels next week, but now they're going into the Tar Heels game with absolutely no wind in their sails, with their heart ripped out. So Miami's at that point now to where they could completely spiral this season, and it's their fault, and it's definitely the coach's fault. But looking at the stats here, so Tyler Van Dyke had a horrible game, 24 of 36, 288 yards, 1 touchdown, 3 picks. King for Georgia Tech, not a good game. 12 of 25, 1 touchdown, 2 picks. Look at the total yardage here. Georgia Tech, 250 yards. Miami, 454. So Miami almost doubles them on yardage and loses just due to bonehead calls. Miami, of course, loses the turnover battle. 5 turnovers versus Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech had 2. So Miami did everything they could to try to lose this game, begging Georgia Tech to beat them, and Georgia Tech beat them. And now Miami's getting thrown right out of the top 25. And it's a real shame. Like I said, if you are a Hurricanes fan, I definitely feel bad for you. They should have won this game, and they should be 5-0, but they're not. The game we had was 5-0 Maryland coming to number 4 Ohio State. So Ohio State does get the win here, 37-17. this game, look, I've been very hard on the Buckeyes this year. Deservedly so, because they've been playing like crap. They've been winning, but their offense is completely non-existent. Probably the most talented offensive roster in the country with the best wide receiver core. This team can't buy 40 points, no matter who they play. The defense is playing at the highest level it has played there in a very long time. So they have a championship caliber defense, but versus Maryland, they go into halftime 10-10. How is that feasible? Now, they got the win 37-17, so props there, but massive warning signs. If you can't beat these teams and you come out tied halftime constantly, once you play a really good team, once you play Michigan, you're going to lose. You can't wait to the second half to get some turnovers and finally get it going. That might get you through the crappy teams, but that will catch up to you. And Ryan Day's play calling was pretty questionable first half, but they do get the win 37-17. But Kyle McCord, 19 of 29, 320 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had 320 yards, but it was not pretty. He had a lot of possible picks, but Maryland was not a good enough team to capitalize on it. He had a lot of throws into the secondary that should have been picked off, but Maryland's just not that good. And Tagovailoa had a completely sloppy second half. They did everything they could to lose the game. Buckeyes got the win. Total yardage, 382. Maryland has 302 with 2 turnovers. So Buckeyes do survive another week. Props to them for getting the win. What is Ryan Day going to say this week? Because 2 weeks ago he trashed Lou Holtz for saying they were soft. They have a bye week. They come out this week, look completely unprepared and soft. So who's the next old guy that he wants to trash now? Not going to let off on them. He wants this pressure, and they're playing like crap every week. Do not trust this score. The game was a lot closer than that. They have a lot of problems. If they played any top 10 teams right now outside of Notre Dame, they would lose. And that's a fact. So Kyle McCord is not getting better. I don't trust the 320 yards. But that's my breakdown of the Buckeyes this weekend. Next game we had was number 23 LSU versus number 21 Missouri. Now, I said previously that Missouri was overrated. They were not going to finish the year in the top 25, but they played a very good game here, very competitive, but anyone can score versus LSU. They probably have one of the worst defenses in the country. How did that happen? They're a very talented roster. They did very well in the transfer portal, brought in a lot of players on the D-line. Now, they did get the win 49-39, but every weekend's a shootout. It's constant. 50-55. Like, how did that happen with this roster? So how did this SEC defensive team basically turn into a Big 12 team from like 2012 to where they have absolutely no defense and they have to win 45-40 every single weekend? I can't fathom that. And this is a very talented team. So Jaden Daniels, if he plays on any other team and they are undefeated, he is in the front runner for the Heisman right now. This guy's playing crazy, having a great year. It's just a shame that they're basically 4-2. But like I said, they do get the win 49-39. So Missouri should get kicked out of the top 25 this week. But total yardage here, the LSU Tigers had 533 yards, and the Missouri, they had 527 yards. Very evenly matched game, but LSU, no matter who they play, it just seems to be a shootout every single weekend. Kind of a letdown season from them, but I did say that they'd go 8-4 to 9-3. They were definitely overrated, and it's just still evident they're not getting better. Next game we had was number 13 Washington State versus the UCLA Bruins. So the Bruins did win this game, so they're now 4-1. And they won 25-17. Props to the Bruins here. This was a really big win for them. They should be getting back into the top 25 this weekend. And Washington State will probably drop to the 20s, but they should still stay in the top 25 because they have a pretty good win versus Oregon State. Now, with this game, so props to Dante Moore. He had a really good game as a freshman. He did have some picks, but he outplayed Cameron Ward. So Washington State's offense has been rolling this year, but Chip Kelly actually has a pretty good defensive team this year. So props to Chip Kelly, props to the Bruins, really good win. Look at these total yards here. So Washington State, who's just been scoring 216 yards. They got shut down 216 yards and the Bruins had 470 yards. Really strong win here. This just shows how deep the Pac-12 is. Now they will have even more teams ranked in the top 25 because the Bruins should be coming in, and I would not be surprised if the Buffaloes, Colorado, also come back into the top 25 this weekend. Pac-12 is loaded. Still a really good year for the Cougars. Obviously, they have no home next year, but both of these teams are having a pretty good season so far. Next game we had was Virginia Tech playing Florida State, number 5. So Florida State did get the win here, 39-17. Florida State got off to a really fast hot start. They had 22 points first quarter, and then they kind of just coasted from that point forward, but it doesn't really matter because some of their last games have been pretty close, so it's good that they had a game where they actually beat their opponent pretty well. So they do win 39-17. The offense and the defense both played pretty good this weekend. So total yardage, Virginia Tech had 313 and Florida State had 452. Jordan Travis did not have to do much this weekend, but that's perfectly fine because there's no reason to run him out there constantly passing the ball. Keep the team healthy. He has been banged up the last couple weeks. They did have the bye week, so he should be fully rested at this point going forward, getting into the meat of the conference schedule going forward. But a really good win for Florida State. With Texas losing, Florida State should definitely be coming back into the top 4 when the next poll comes out. Next game we had was number 11 Alabama at Texas A&M. So Alabama did get the win. They moved to 5-1 and they won 26-20. This was a really good game. This game went down to the end. So it was kind of back and forth. It was more of a field position defensive game because the Aggies do have a pretty good defensive line. So the game was pretty low scoring. There wasn't too many yards, but props to Jalen Milroe. So he goes 21 of 33, 321 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick. Those numbers might not blow you off the board, but they're actually really good numbers because he played a really good defense and he had his best game. So he stepped up. They won the game. He had some pretty questionable throws, but he had some really good throws. He throws a pretty good deep ball. That's his primary thing, and then scrambling somewhat. But really good game for them. If you are a Bama fan, I would say this is the most encouraging win so far this year. The reason that I say that is because you played a good defense and you won the game at College Station. So that's a big step going forward, trying to get into the postseason. For the Aggies, this is a loss, but it's still a good loss. So Jimbo's team looked good. They were really competitive. Max Johnson is filling in for Connor Wegman, who got knocked out because he hurt his foot. So they still played a really good game. The game was still almost theirs at the end. They did lose, but they're 4-2, so not a bad year so far, considering they only won 5 games last year. But I would say both teams are still alive in the West. Bama still has no conference loss, and the Aggies only have 1. So still pretty competitive there in the SEC West. The next game we had was Syracuse, who's having a pretty strong year, versus number 14, the North Carolina Tar Heels. So Carolina does get the win 40-7, and they move to 5-0. To me, this was the Tar Heels' best win so far this year. The reason that I say that is because they look good on both sides of the ball. Drake May, 33 of 47, 442 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. The reason that stood out to me so much is because he hasn't been really utilized this year. They've been more of a run-focused team. So Phil Longo goes to Wisconsin. Philip Lindsay is now the new offensive coordinator, and he's more run-focused. So Drake May hasn't been asked to do much, but he's a top 5 pick. So I have said every single week, there will be a game where he will take over, and if he needs to win it in the fourth quarter, he will win it. Well, he didn't need to win it this week, but he went off. So 442 yards. The Tar Heels, 644 yards total, and the defense only gives up 221 yards. So a complete game by the Tar Heels. This is the best position that they could hope for because next week they play Miami. They look good on both sides of the ball, offense and defense, whereas Miami will be limping into that game. So that's just the way that the Tar Heels wanted them. So a really strong performance by Mac Brown's team. And they did not get distracted by having Miami next weekend, whereas Miami was completely distracted and they were looking towards next weekend. Next game we had was number 20 Kentucky versus number 1 Georgia Bulldogs. So Georgia did beat the living crap out of Kentucky here. They get the win 51-13. Now, I also think this was the best win of Georgia's season, because just like Ohio State, they start every single game slow, cannot get the running game going. They don't actually win till the second half. This was the first game this year. Out of the gates, they came out hot. Running the ball, throwing the ball. So they got a pretty convincing win here. Now, I said last week, Kentucky had absolutely no business being in the top 25. I don't care that they were 5-0. They always start the year 4-0, 5-0, and then they completely just train wreck and fall apart. Devin Leary is a complete disaster. They beat Florida last weekend. He had like 68 yards. He stinks. The guy can't throw at all. So he goes 10 of 26, 128 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's pathetic. And then Carson Beck has his best game of the year. Finally stepped up, had a really good game. 28 of 35, 389 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 1 pick. Look at the total yardage here. Kentucky, who is just a run-heavy team. You can't be a run-focused team versus Georgia's line, just like you can't do that versus Michigan. You have to be able to go vertical to play those teams, and they just completely got shut down. They had 183 yards. Georgia, 608 yards. A completely dominant win in all facets of the game by the Bulldogs. So even though Michigan played well this week, Georgia will definitely be holding on to that number 1 spot. Finally had a complete, really good game. Next game we had number 2 Michigan at Minnesota. So Michigan did get the win, and they got the win pretty convincingly, 52-10. The biggest story here is they finally gave up more than 7 points for, I think it was the first time this year. I think they were giving up 6.8 points, and they hadn't given up more than 7 points. So good job for the Gophers for getting 10 points. But nonetheless, Michigan had a very strong win here. You look at J.J. McCarthy. He goes 14 of 20, 219 yards. Blake Corum, good game. Donovan Edwards, great game. So Michigan is keeping everyone healthy. That's the main goal. They finally got the offense going this game. So looking at the total stats, Michigan, 432 yards. Minnesota only had 169 yards. Every single week, Michigan's defense is completely shutting people down. Now, they haven't really played anyone good yet, but nonetheless, they are playing as well as anyone in the country on the defensive side of the ball. Just like Georgia, if you want to play them, you have to be a vertical team. Usually that's Ohio State's specialty, but they can't move the ball. So Michigan looking really strong, and they should definitely hold on to that number 2 spot. Very good win for them. Next game we had was Arkansas versus number 16 Ole Miss at Ole Miss. So Ole Miss does hang on to get the win, 27-20. I said that this would be a very close game, and it was. So Arkansas almost was able to tie it there at the end, but the Rebels do pull it out. Jackson Dart had a so-so game. So this is so Lane Kiffin, and I love Lane Kiffin, but they have a great game versus the Tigers, and then they just kind of have a so-so game. Like, what happened to the offense last week? Because we know that Arkansas has absolutely no defense. But nonetheless, really competitive game from both teams here. Jackson Dart goes 16-25, 153 yards, 1 touchdown, no picks. Quinton Junkins didn't really run that much. He had 18 carries, 65 yards, 1 touchdown. I think last week he had like 180-something yards. So he was kind of quiet this week. But good win for Ole Miss. Total yardage, Arkansas 286, and Ole Miss had 349. So definitely not a high yardage game considering the 2 offenses that were playing. But Ole Miss moves to 5-1. So still very much alive in the SEC West. And the next game, we had another upset here. We had number 10 Notre Dame going down to number 25 Louisville. So Louisville gets the win, and pretty convincingly, 33-20. That score is not close, but the game was even further. So the score doesn't give full justice to how much Louisville owned this game to me. So just a complete disaster from Notre Dame. And that's a real shame because they started out the year really hot, but they had a really tough stretch there. They had to play the Buckeyes, they had to play ranked Duke, and then they had to play at ranked Louisville. And next weekend, they have USC. So probably the toughest 4-game stretch of any team right now. So props to them for, I guess, I guess, being 1-2 right now through that stretch, but just a horrible game for Sam Hartman. So he goes 22 of 38, 254 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 picks. Plummer doesn't have to do that much. He goes 17 of 24, 145 yards, 1 touchdown, but they ran the ball down Irish's throat. Total yardage, Notre Dame 298, Louisville 330. Both teams came into this game with top 20 defenses. The defenses played very strong, but Notre Dame 5 turnovers to Louisville's 1. So they really lost the turnover battle. That was the main kicker there. So props to Louisville, though. So Jeff Brom's team, a lot of credit there, and they will definitely be moving up in the top 25. So next we had another top 25 team that goes down. Number 24, Fresno State, loses to Wyoming at Wyoming. So Fresno State was favored to win this game. Fresno State has a very good team. Wyoming is never to be underestimated. So they've beaten Fresno State, they've beaten Appalachian State, they've beaten Texas Tech. They're now 5-1. They deserve to be in the top 25 as of right now. They are kind of in that bracket of the best group of 5 teams. So there's them, Fresno State, there's Air Force. So there's some really good teams out there. But nonetheless, a lot of props to them for beating Fresno State, who was having a pretty good offense so far this year. So Micah Keene goes 23 of 35, 218 yards, and Peasley 19 of 27, 183 yards and 3 touchdowns. Looking at the total yardage, this game was very close. So Fresno State has 324 yards and Wyoming has 329. So the defense is what made the difference, and it's that one turnover that probably cost Fresno State. But Fresno State will be leaving the top 25, and Wyoming should definitely be coming in. They have now 3 wins that are pretty good wins. Getting into our later games, we have number 15, Oregon State beating Cal. So they win 52-40. So they kind of have a shootout here. Oregon State is number 15. They will now be 5-1. The Pac-12 is so deep, just like Washington State. Both of these teams have no home next season, but they're both having really strong years. So just kind of looking at the stats here, DJU, 19 of 25, 275 yards, 5 passing touchdowns. Mendoza, 21 of 32, 207 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 pick. Looking at the total yardage, Oregon State did good both passing and running the ball, so they come in with 498 yards, and Cal has 448 yards. But a really good win versus a conference foe, and the Beavers are now 5-1 going into that conference play. And the last game that we will actually be looking at, as of right now, I'm actually currently watching it right now. It's in the 4th quarter with 8 minutes left. That's Arizona at 3-2 versus number 9 USC Trojans. The game right now is tied 28-28. I'm not really surprised here. So I said last week that I was taking the under on this game because I in no way trust USC's defense, no matter who they're playing. So Arizona's coming into this game with their backup, Fifatia was his name, and he's 21 of 29 right now, 263 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick. Running back Coleman, 16 carries, 116 yards. Caleb Williams is actually having an off night, but I still think the Trojans will win it, but it's the typical Trojans fashion of god-awful defense making the game close. So he's 8 of 16, 142 yards right now. So total yardage, Arizona has 410, USC has 232. That's the problem when Lincoln Riley refuses to fire his good friend Alec Grinch at defensive coordinator is if the offense has one game where they're not scoring 50 points every single night, you could potentially lose because your defense is god-awful and they cannot tackle anyone. So many missed tackles. It's just pathetic. But nonetheless, I think they'll win it, but they're going to have a tough time playing anyone that can score because if Caleb Williams can't get you 50 points just one time, they stand no chance. And that's not a way to be competitive, especially with the talent that is on the defensive side of the ball. But that completes the AP poll reaction for the top 25. A lot of upsets this weekend. We had some really good games. We had some good teams that went down, some good teams that won, and we also probably had the worst coaching decision ever next to the Seattle decision, and that was Mario Cristobal not taking a knee. Hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks.